Thank you very much, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Only 17 minutes, but we're okay. We're okay. We're gonna fix it. Welcome. This is the last day of our summer school on applied economics for Latin America. Today we're not gonna have lessons, but we're gonna have something interesting related with the lessons that you already have all these days. Our keynote speakers and professors Luca Eduardo Fierro and Giuliano Toshi are going to present their works related with the topics, of course. And I'm very happy, really, really happy. I'm going to introduce him next, but we have our keynote, Lorenzo Nalin, who is online right now. He's in Rome, I think, yeah. And our professor here, a very important figure at the Mexico intellectual elite, Professor Juan Carlos Moreno Reed is with us. But we're going to start with the presentation of Giuliano. Yeah, you're going to. You have 20 minutes. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for the kind word, and Julia. And again, thank you so much for the organization of these days. And welcome everybody. Welcome Professor Breed and ciao Lorenzo. And actually, it's interesting because this guy is gonna be in two of the paper that will be presented today. So the first one that I'm presenting right now is as you can see here is that the title is regarding the topics of the ecological transition in Colombia, for which we have developed this prototype ecological input-output stock flow consistent model alongside the above mentioned Lorenzo and our colleague Leonardo Rojas Rodriguez. Right, let me just go on. I think it's not working again. I think you can, yeah, you have to put, yeah. Okay, okay, yeah, okay, now it's working. So as I said, we developed this study in order to test ecological scenario for the case of for the case of the Colombian economy. We base our work on previous studies with the same co-authors plus another colleague of ours based at the Economic Convention of from Latin America and Caribbean, Esteban Perez Caldente. A model that was already sort of tailored in order to address some of the sort of characteristic of Latin American economy, such as the early integration into financial market, and on top of that, we add a sort of a simplified input-output structure, again, drawn on the sort of the data, the inter-industry data provided for the Colombian case. And we constructed several scenarios that can affect the energy transition. So a little bit of stylized fact regarding these economies. As you can sort of observe, the pattern of trade in this country is basically the standard sort of case of small open economy who mostly sort of export mining and petroleum sort of products, which represent the bulk of his exported goods. And in terms of sort of imports, obviously the bulk of it, it's the situation is completely switched, is completely mirrored by and switched in terms of high dependency in terms of imported manufacturing imports. So in this case, it's Colombia kind of fits in the classic sort of hypothesis of open sort of small open economy specializes in commodities and dependent upon sort of foreign technology, mostly in terms of manufactured products. And in terms of employment and wages, obviously, there is the bulk of both is represented by the service sector, which could be somehow a proxy to also sort of measures of the importance of service sector closer to or very proximate to the informal ones. And you can also see that the other sector, including mining and manufacturing, represent instead a smaller proportion with respect to the service sector. In terms of the input-output structure, well, this is a very simple sort of representation of the direct backward and forward linkages. This is very sort of standard and common in input-output analysis, sort of presenting this sort of in the XY axis, XY plane, this, the intersection between backward and forward linkages. So the classic sort of school case will say that whenever if you plot those, if you generate those graphs and you have this industry which will concentrate sort of in the bottom left panel or quadrant of those of this figure, that is they are both either forward and backward linkages will be on average below 1, then your productive structure is present a relative weak linkages both in a backward and a forward sense. So and this is interesting also because perhaps one would have expected, for instance, mining to be performing perhaps better in terms of forward linkages, or manufacturing to be a little bit closer to 1. But this is I was surprised myself when I produced this plot, and it's actually denotes some sort of relative weakness of the sort of the productive structure of and the inter-industry demand of for Colombia. So basically, we developed this sort of this model drawing upon a growing body on contribution that has been exploding in recent years. Obviously, there are at least I would say 3 body of contribution in the more sort of narrow sort of SFC literature. The first one is the so-called theoretical ecological stock flow models. That is, that really start off with a bunch of work in the in the mid 2010s, with especially the work of Berg and Dafermos and others, in which they were really the first to try to sort of implement in this sort of post-Keynesian SFC framework this sort of ecological macro feedback. Then I would say that there has been also a development in terms of integrating SFC model with sort of or better say, so fitting an input-output structure within a SFC macro model. So there are a number of work that have been going into this direction, and also a number of work who are trying to sort of develop fully empirically calibrated models, either sort of standard macro models, and which is, and this I will say this the most common things nowadays in terms of especially if you want to deal with ecological related research question, that is empirical, fully calibrated ecological SFC models. Obviously, this is a sort of a recollection of a number of work, and which is definitely outdated because I mean the literature is expanding at a sort of at an exponential rate. So, but this is kind of give you an overview of where the different research groups are currently. At the same time, there has been also a development of this literature and an application of this literature for case of Latin American economies. So the model has been developed for a number of countries. Mostly, I would say theoretical models, Though here you can really distinguish between model related more with sort of static and short and medium run performance, perhaps more in line with sort of the Godley, Levy sort of tradition, and models, more tailored with the sort of medium to long run research question, and sort of trying to sort of address also some of the issues related to the countries of the regions. Some words on the structure of our economy. So what we have done is basically sort of combine those work that we have developed at the Economic Commission for Latin American and Caribbean, among others under the supervision of Esteban Pérez Caldente, and combining with this sort of ecological macro framework approach into the SFC framework put forward by Dafermos, Nicolaidi, and Galanis, and also applied for the sort of generalized for the case of our economy in Carnevali and others. So here we have a sort of, in terms of obviously, being an empirical model and tailored for just one country, obviously we have our sort of standard institutional sector. That is, obviously the private sector, the financial sector, the government sector, the central bank, and obviously the rest of the world. In terms of financial assets, so we seize the relatively richness and of the financial account data provided either by DANE and the Banco della Repubblica, mostly in terms of providing detail in terms of the decomposition of in terms of the domination of the currency domination of each asset and liability. So this allows us to sort of have different sort of different asset and liabilities denominated in sort of either in local and foreign currency, as you can see in this slide. And being, as I said, sort of an empirical with all this sort of feature model, obviously it is a kind of sort of large scale model. As I said, we fully calibrated using data from sort of the financial account, sectoral account, industry account, and national account, using DANE, BANREP, and also data from the Ministry of Finance. And we also try to seek to replicate either the observed series in terms of macro series, and also sort of the sort of fiscal institution of those of this country, especially the set of fiscal rules that have been implemented starting from the early 2010s. So in terms of the depiction of the model, this is a simple sort of, so I would say this model is it's a large scale, but in terms of, sort of mechanism, it's a pretty, it's really close to a, so a standard sort of macro post-Keynesian model. So in terms of, a deeper depiction of the sort of its functioning, you have also, interaction between sort of the institutional and the productive sector. Then obviously the interaction of the rest of the world, which follows sort of its own dynamic. And at the same time, we also have sort of the infrastructure in terms of the ecosystem, in which we have this sort of inflows and outflows of material resources, residual, and an outflow of residual generated by economic activity, and also sort of the demand of energy that it is demanded by the sort of the economic activity as a whole, whenever obviously in order to support again the economic activity. And in terms of the representation of the sort of the economy, obviously we use those sort of the very commonly used sort of balance sheet and transaction flow matrix in order to depict, sort of either the flows and the stocks of our economy. Obviously, sort of the stock part closely match, the kind of stock that we have, that I was mentioning you. And again, the fact that we have been using, we see the possibility to have different denomination of currency of asset and liability thanks to the ability of the DANE to track the BANREP to track the denomination of the currency domination of those assets and liability. And in terms of the transaction flow, this is the sort of will be the basic structure. And again, in terms of the industry structure, we had this sort of six division of in terms of productive activity. We mostly focus on the sort of the most important ones. So we obviously have agriculture, we have mining. Obviously here in terms of we pour into mining also, sort of the manufacturing related petroleum activities. So it's it could be even we even label mining an extractive sort of sector. So manufacturing here is really, focusing on sort of, it's net of activities related to petroleum activities. And so then we have an energy sector and transportation sector, and then basically the service sector. And sort of this is also the sort of the material flows and stock balances that we use in this literature. But let me jump to this sort of the main mechanism of the model. As I said, since we try to sort of maintain the property of the original model we developed at ECLAC, in which we had this sort of which we try to give importance to this highlights fact related to sort of the sovereign risk premium and their impact on sort of the main sort of macro model. So we use this sort of mechanism in order to sort of link to some of the main real and financial variables. So, for instance, here we had this sort of mechanism. We actually simplified the original structure of, which is, the sovereign premium, which, where data mostly follow sort of, I would say sort of the standard sort of variable that's sort of widely recognized in the literature, such as, foreign debt to GDP ratio, exchange rate variation and the general volatility in the financial market. Then we also have the equivalent risk premium at the corporate level, which here we simplify as a simple sort of spread or on the sovereign premium. And the nominal exchange rate kind of follows an autoregressive process order one, and is influenced by either real and financial factor in terms of trade and this risk premium. And this kind of influences also sort of the main sort of institutional sector of our economy. So, for instance, the investment flows has this kind of simple and very sort of also widespread use Rhodian sort of investment function, which is actually augmented by this sort of investment confidence index, which has a sort of which depends upon either a sort of upon the prospect of future returns and upon this sort of sovereign, this corporate risk premium. And in terms of pricing, given that we have an input-output structure, so prices are a function of this technical coefficients, historical and in a sort of post-Keynesian and post-Keynesian fashion, we also have they also depended upon historical unit labor cost and imported inputs. As for the behavior of the rest of the world, we follow kind of the sort of the tier wall framework, slightly modified in order to incorporate sort of also the rule of the terms of trade. Here the rest of the world also follows a specific pattern in terms of demanding government bonds issuing in local currency, which depends upon, again, a number of variables which are, widely recognized by the literature, such as global GDP growth, interest spreads, and again, exchange rate expectation. And interest rate differentials. As I said, the government, as we try to sort of incorporate, the behavior of and the fiscal rules that have been implemented in Colombia since the 2010s, and obviously the fact that a fraction of the debt is issued in foreign currency, we didn't endogenize this fraction, but we decided that it was kind of we deem it almost impossible to find a mechanism to achieve this endogenization. To find a proper mechanism in terms of that could capture this decision. But we can discuss further if there is any mechanism that can be useful to sort of achieve this goal. The central bank basically follows a standard sort of Taylor rules, sort of Taylor rules with obviously augmented with the volatility of the exchange rate. As very briefly for the ecosystem, how much time do I have? I'm left? Okay, 10. Oh, perfect. Okay, as for the ecosystem module, so basically, as I was mentioning, our output does require energy. So, every time, the economic activity sort of kicks in at each interaction of the model. So there will be some sort of energy demand, and sort of energy demand sort of kicks in this carbon, this sort of resource and waste cycle, which eventually generates this stock of CO2 emissions. We do also have these energy and material sources feedbacks upon the economic system via a number of channels, two actually. So the first one is by constraining investment decision, and here we really follow the sort of the approach of Dafermos and Nicolaidi and Galanis, whereby basically, and this is actually very sort of very close to a sort of a more kind of post-Keynesian framework, which we had this sort of energy and resource and energy and material capacity utilization. So the mechanism is very simple. So whenever sort of the economic activity, sort of the energy, so the energy and the material resource capacity realized by the economy overcomes, the target or the one, consistent with the sort of the resource and the energy constraints provided by the Colombian economy, then you have this sort of investment constraint kicking in from the demand side. So it's a way to sort of include supply resource constraint into kind of an investment demand framework. And then we also have a price effect via basically the mechanism is similar, but then it kind of influences directly the markups. So in the end we kind of, and this is kind of it's an inclusion with respect to the original framework of Dafermos and Nicolaidi. A little bit of information regarding, sort of the model itself. This is kind of the picture of the dependency graph with more than 500 sort of variables. Obviously, it's very messy, as you can see, and then as it's the general sort of it's the general picture in this kind of exercise. Everything is endogenous, so each variable has its own feedback on the sort of the main on the feedback on sort of themselves. Though even accounting for this sort of complexity, we managed to sort of at least have a decent fit. Obviously, again, I should have mentioned this kind of still sort of a work in progress and sort of project. So, but we managed to have a good fit in terms of the main sort of demand variables, sort of GDP, investment, consumption, and also export and imports. As in terms of baselines, we basically sort of consider three baseline hypotheses. So the first one is the sort of business as usual scenario, which is the standard exercise you perform when you run this run this policy model, that sort of represent the inertia of the system. In practical terms, represent sort of the current trend in energy consumption implied by the current set of regulations. Then you have sort of the policy scenario where you had, well, I mean, I should say now the business as usual is the policy one has somehow become the business as usual, because the policy scenario were the one that the administration, the Colombian administration, was sort of discussing and debating in order to sort of achieve the green transition sort of goal. And the third scenario, as again is very common in this kind of exercises, is the more ambitious scenario, whereas you want to achieve this goal, not just an energy transition, but a just one. That is, you propose an additional set of policy in order to align with a number of goals in terms of reducing carbon emission, but also decreasing inequalities, increasing trying to achieving a more sustainable productive sector, so on and so forth. Based on this sort of three sort of tendency or baseline, we devised three types of shocks. So the first one is obviously it's the shocks are either the policy shock and the absence of the shock. So for instance, the first kind of shock is the implementation or the lack of industrial policies. And the second one is the arising or the lack of supply and constraint for the oil industry. And the third one is the reduction or the constancy or demand for oil products from the rest of the world. So you have something like that. So this kind of sort of matrix or tree of sort of scenario. So you have the sort of three baselines, and then based on the sort of the different constellation of scenarios in terms of existence or non-existence of industrial policy, existence or non-existence of supply oil constraint or demand external demand constraint, then you are in this set of scenarios. So, I mean, I'm not going to show you, unfortunately, the simulation of the scenarios because, for several reasons, but I'm going to talk you a little bit more regarding the mechanism of this, how we model this scenarios. So, in terms of industrial policies, so we devise the structural change policies in terms of fiscal expansion affecting directly the technical coefficient of production, and in particular the technical coefficient of the sort of the manufacturing industry. So either sort of obviously the vertically horizontal one in the input output matrix. And the speed of and towards a certain target set by the policymaker, in which obviously those manufacturing sector will increase their participation both vertically and horizontally, in a vertically horizontal sense. And the speed of conversion towards this target higher technical coefficients is a function of the sort of the sectoral government expenditure, pour into the specific industry. Again, in accordance with a similar mechanism, put forward by Passarella and others. We also had a more sort of a more structurally sort of consistent sort of mechanism relating directly to the improvement of the income elasticity ratio, which, sort of a kind of a well-stylized fact that, sort of technological industrial policy will sort of have an effect in terms of raising the sort of the export elasticity ratio and reducing the import elasticity one. Thank you. And obviously, we estimated separate sort of tendency in terms of trade dynamics. So this is the depiction of how this will work. So we those technical coefficients will be increased, though again it will jump immediately from the period one and the period from period where those policies are implemented, but they will slowly converge towards this target. And as for the supply constraint, we basically use a similar mechanism, but the mechanism here works the other way around, and here and obviously affects the mining industry. And here it's a direct function. It's directly related with the evolution of the stock of material resources. And also we have an inverse mechanism in terms of the influence of the upon the income elasticity ratio. So there is a deterioration of the income elasticity ratio in this sense. So here obviously different industries are affected, and different technical coefficients are affected. And in terms of the demand constraint, this is perhaps easily to do it because we do constrain the demand of the rest of the world, and we also shift the composition of the export basket. So in the end, so whenever we interact those sort of scenarios, obviously there are you have an input-output structure that tends to change accordingly, and there are different sort of mechanisms that tends to feedback on each other. And also in terms of backward and forward linkages, you have this use dynamic whereby, for instance, you have if you have the manufacturing that if the policymaker has to raise in terms of backward and forward participation, then there is a slight pull, especially considering the interaction with the supply constraint coming from the oil, coming from the mining sector. So final thought. So there is some work to do, and there's still some, and we're working on this. So for instance, we need to decompose the physical stock flow block. At this point in time, it's still aggregated. So basically, it takes on the aggregate output, and it influences. Yeah, I'm done. Thank you. So we need to work on that. There is data available from the Ministry of Energy in Colombia, and then we can do it. We need to decompose financial account, and this is generally a challenge generally from a data standpoint, and also for this model, because one of the strengths of the SFC approach is this sort of integration with data, macro data, and macro financial data, and sort of theory. but the point is that financial accounts are usually not provided at the industry level. So you have to come up with some strong story, strong justification on how you can decompose the financial account, relying on basically on microdata. And then so we also rethink the damage function. We didn't really use the damage function here in this model. We had it in the previous sort of ECLAC model. We also didn't use it because we received some criticism also from inside the ECLAC, and because the standard sort of damage function has received some criticism for being too generalistic and too simplistic. So we need to rethink also to incorporate this part, and also perhaps and this is another ongoing debate in the SFC, in general, broader SFC input-output community, the need to sort of have to think carefully regarding endogenous technical change. So yeah, that's it. So again, it's a work in progress, so there is no result, but I really look forward to your sort of thoughts and feedback. Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you very much. This is awesome to watch, and I look forward to when it comes out. I guess if you were to be asked to go into the Colombian government, what would you tell them? What would be your policy recommendations?
Well, I mean, part of this work, trying to be as polite as possible, because it's actually part of this work basically was developed, because there was an interest by the Colombian government to sort of test this number of policy scenarios. Then there were some idiosyncrasies in terms of the composition, basically, of the Colombian government that, basically disrupted the prosecution of the continuation of this work. So that's why we stole a little bit in terms of, promoting the results of this exercise. What I can say is that, obviously, Colombia finds itself, like many developing countries, in a sort of a knife edge path. And this is in the end what we did find out. I mean, I won't go in detail, but perhaps we can go off record in details regarding this exercise. But yeah, I mean, the idea is to sort of achieve this sort of just an energy transition. Basically requires a number of policy mixes, and also requires some kind of may require some sort of scenario where the sort of the external sector doesn't overreact in terms of either from a financial perspective, and imagine somehow to sort of fully sort of maintain the external demand, whereas shifting its composition in terms of obviously shifting away its composition from oil product and towards more sort of manufacturing products, which is something again challenging, because the Colombian economy again is really dependent upon the mining sector, and it is not to be taken for granted. So yeah, that's So, and obviously this is so I will say it's not an easy task. I mean, to have to achieve this multiple goal. Well, I will say that perhaps I would say that one could be more as more optimistic as possible in terms of the energy transition, applying, all this kind of industrial policy, et cetera, et cetera. But also one has to be very careful in terms of, thinking about, the consequences on sort of the external sectors. And well, especially, and this is a general sort of could be generalized for many countries in Latin American, which kind of from where you will sort of, and this actually wasn't really within the scope of this within the scope of the exercise, for where you will sort of buy those sort of additional additional inputs to to create those those green and advanced sort of and advanced sectors. So yeah, that's something that are very sort of general and broad and not very specific policy recommendation. But yeah, I would say that is a more of a I would say that more of a comment. Yeah.
Hola. Hi. Thank you, Juliana. It was a really interesting presentation and very useful for my research as well. Maybe you mentioned it on the presentation, I missed it, but how much have you delved, or how much have you considered the role of employment on the policies? Because I remember in the graph you showed that I think it was like around 10% of the employment is in mining. And considering that this, if you go to an ecological transition, should be reduced. This will have a large effects, and also considering that probably the services in Colombia, I guess, are also linked to this other mining sector. So if you decrease this sector, also the service sector will decrease. So maybe you can delve into that.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Well, the employment, generally, there's the scenario, the mechanisms for for estimating employment and demand for employment were very simple, like very sort of simple, basic mechanism. We did observe some of those sort of increasing composition in terms of for a larger sort of variance, in larger share of employment being concentrated in the sort of manufacturing sector, which is obvious because especially when you implement sort of the industrial policy and use the technical coefficient sort of structure. Well, I should have mentioned also that for this first exercise, so we're actually working on the same model. We are working to expand this model, and then we are working to sort of to have to basically to calibrate the model with all the data, all the input output data available since 1995. And also for the technical the labor coefficients. We didn't have this in this model because we simply use the latest available data for labor coefficient and input output coefficients. So in a way, so we started from this coefficient and then we move the structure according to this theoretical mechanism. That being said, obviously, in the industrial policy scenarios, you have a larger share of employment concentrated in manufacturing sector. You still have a high share of employment concentrated in service sector. in service sector, which it is something that again because we borrowed this exercise from some of those we designed this exercise from basically a demand from a policymaker. So it was demand led in a certain way. So the point is that basically we didn't enter into we didn't enter into discussion related to the composition of the service sector. We could have said something related to that, like to distinguish at least sort of a low-tech service sector and an high-tech sort of service sector. We had actually out of the service sector the transportation, but we ended up not using it. So actually, a good question could have been a possible venue would have been sort to invest, have additional scenarios in which there isn't a simple sort of investment in terms of industrial policies, but also there is a more general sort of strategy in terms of improving infrastructure, generating green infrastructure, and this obviously would have created a more generalized push towards employment in terms of this kind of sector and away from the mining one. But yeah, I mean, usually the effects are obviously the baselines tend to be sort of the worst case. Well, I mean, the worst case scenarios tend to be, the one with, without industrial policy, right? But obviously, on the other hand, the industrial policies tend to be undermined when there were either this supply and demand constraints from the oil industry. Still better than the absence of the industrial policies, but still also to sort of if you allow me sort of to sort of point out what the importance of a non-naive sort of approach of the policy making by simply saying, okay, we do this transition and then we just abandon the mining sector. No, because actually the mining sector has an importance and then has to be sort of the consequences of abandoning this sector has to be dealt with in the medium and the long run. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giuliano. Well, I have to say that we want to ask for your presentation if you can, because some of those who are online, including me, wanted. Yeah, but anyway, we're going to go with the presentation of our other professor of the summer school, Luca Eduardo Fierro. And yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can hear me, right? Yes. So thank you very much again for the invitation and welcome, everybody. So today I'm going to present a work in progress with my colleagues at IASA and at the Central Bank of Canada. The title of this project is Macroeconomic Effect of Tariffs in a Multi-Country Agent-Based Model. Now, I think that these days you don't need a lot of motivation when you present a work on tariffs, so that the first line of the title is pretty clear to everybody. I assume perhaps the second part, why should we take the effort of building a new model since we have already trade models? Let me try to convince you about this. So we know the so-called Liberation Day in US, April the 2nd this year, they were announced a new, what is going here? Okay. I'm not touching this. New tariffs were announced, and the scope of these tariffs is huge in historical terms. This is the highest jump in tariffs in US since Second World War. We have both theoretical but also experience that this might be a big problem globally. The first reaction, of course, is always in the financial markets that are very quick to react. And indeed, they right after the announcement, they kind of signaled that deterioration in expectations worldwide. However, we need to quantify more medium-term macroeconomic effects in US, trade partner, and at the global level. This is a lot more difficult. We need models for that. We have some, but I would argue that we can have some more, and agent-based can help us because they can give us information, richer information about dynamics of adjustment, but also a more fine-grained insight about what's happening within industries and even at the individual household level. Let me start from what we have. Most of the time, when it comes to trade, the empirical models that we have, I should mention this. Today, we're going to talk about empirical models because we want to quantify the effect of these tariffs. So when it comes to this research question, we usually use CG models, trade models. We have quite a bunch of them. You can see this in this table. And so if I have to think about the main characteristics of this model, beside the obvious one being CGEs, is that they are multi-country. They have many countries that interact with each other with trade. They're very carefully calibrated when it comes to trade shares and trade elasticities, because these are, of course, the main mechanism through which trade shocks are transmitted to the economy. And on the other hand, they're equilibrium model. There is limited scope for analyzing transitional dynamics. What you have an equilibrium, you shock this equilibrium, you end up in another equilibrium. How you travel from A to B, it's not so detailed. On the other hand, we have ABMs that in principle might be thought as complement to CGE because, during the school, we almost only looked at country-level models, but we have multi-country ABMs. We have a bunch of them. One thing that they do better than CG, they capture out of equilibrium dynamics, and they capture transitional path. They're a little bit richer in terms of environment when it comes simply if you count the amount of variables they can report on, right? And that's good from the point of view of a policymaker because you want to have information. On the other hand, calibration is very qualitative. Both the calibration that describe the economies themselves in isolation, the various countries, but most importantly, the trade. The trade is very qualitatively calibrated. And on top of that, trade barriers such as tariffs and the likes are never analyzed, at least according to my knowledge of the field. So what we are trying to do here is we want to design a multi-country agent base for these purposes, so to take advantage of all these good features that ABM have, but on the other hand, we recognize the limitation that we face. So we want to integrate some aspect where the CG models are better than us, and especially when it comes to the calibration of the trade shares. And at the end of the day, so this is the more methodological part of the project, but then of course we want to test, we want to try this model, we want to put the Trump's tariff into the model to see what happens. Okay, that's the model. So just a very short summary. We start from this empirical ABM that we had a look on Wednesday of the summer school. Is an empirical model developed by Paul Edna and co-authors. As you know, and also the Bank of Canada, we have two strands. So the Canadian and the Austrian one. The first thing that we want to do, we want to calibrate this model for as many countries as possible, or according to our ability. And we want to make this country interact through trade. In particular, we want to calibrate trade share across all countries and the rest of the world, but we want to disaggregate this country at the type of expenditure. We want to know how much final consumption Mexico gets from Colombia. Same for intermediate consumption, same from capital formation. But we also want to have information at the sectorial level. So we want to have trade shares that tells us country sector, sell. Want to know manufacturing of Mexico, how much buys from agriculture in Colombia, for example, okay? And then we want to apply tariffs that are so-called across the board. So country level tariff in which one country says, I'm gonna tax all the goods coming from country B, but then we also want to be more fine grade and to allow for more targeted tariffs, so specific goods, specific sectors. How to do this? So first of all, that's what we managed to do so far. I told you this is a work in progress. This is the number, this is all the countries that we managed to calibrate. If you want, this is a picture of our failure because you see a lot of whites. White is what we didn't even try. So we have 50% of GDP at the moment, of the global GDP at the moment. Very important countries missing. And the reason is time, but mostly data availability. We started from OECD countries. Why? Because we wanted to start from a source of data which is homogeneous, right? But even then, we didn't manage to nail all the countries. The data requirement for these models are very high, not for the trade. For the trade is fine, we have everything, at least at the input-output level. The problem is calibrating each single economy. So for the moment, we managed to do 31 OECD countries. 7 OECD countries are still left. We'll see how far we go in the future. That's where we stand in terms of scope, geographical scope of the calibration. Now I want to show a couple of technical part of the model. So how we calibrate the trade shares and how we use them in the model. But that's the typical input-output structure when you have a multi-country input-output structure. And let's take the case of intermediate consumption. We select one country, we select one sector of that country, and we want to buy how much that sector buy from another sector for another country, right? Once we have that, we want to take the share of that particular expenditure over the total expenditure of that sector for that particular product. Then we have the trade share, but as you learned so far, in ABMs, you don't stop there. We have a disaggregation, which is sectorial, but also firm level disaggregation. So we know how much that sector buy from that country, but we need to distribute it across all the firms that belong to that sector. Now, in principle, you might have firm level data for some country, but you don't have for all of them. So we decide to start simple and just say, you know, we are going to distribute homogeneously to all firms of that sector, that particular expenditure. Okay. In the beginning, we are not able to calibrate so much heterogeneity. Then, once we have that, we need to use it. And as you know, one of the building blocks of ABMs are the matching mechanism in the market. So in the original model, in this class of model, usually the search and matching works this way. Every demander goes to the market and has a certain probability of picking a supplier. And this probability is decreasing in price. The cheaper you are, the more likely you are to be picked. In order to force the trade share into this mechanism, we introduce a sort of a bias. And this bias is exactly that trade share that we calibrated. So we say, on top of the price, you have, for example, a home bias. You prefer to buy from your own country. And then you have a little bit of willingness to buy from other countries and so on and so on. Once you have that, you have a model that can reproduce the trade share, which are empirically calibrated quite faithfully. And at the end of the day, you also need to include the tariffs. Once you have the bilateral tariffs country against which other countries, or also multilateral tariffs. What they do, they're gonna influence the price that you pay as a demander. And that's that. That's the only equation you're gonna see in today's presentation. We've done a big effort into the calibration of all the countries, into the calibration of the trade. And now we are ready to provide an application. We start with a simple one. A US-Canada trade war. You can imagine why we picked US and Canada, because we work with the Bank of Canada and they were interested in that. And the only reason we start from there is because when we start simple, we are more able to understanding the mechanism behind our results. So we start with 3 scenarios, so baseline scenarios where nothing happened. A scenario in which there are unilateral tariffs, so there is US imposing a 25% across the board tariff on all imported goods from Canada, and then a retaliation. So on top of US putting tariffs, US put the very same tariffs against US. Canada put the same tariffs against US. So this is what we get. The first variable that is affected in an experiment like this, when all the chain of events starts, is how the bilateral trade shares between these 2 countries evolve. So the first thing you might say, so tariffs are somehow successful in redirecting domestic demand to your own market and away from the other market. So for example, just to understand how to read this graph, on top left, you have US with US. So this is how much Americans buy Americans' goods over the total. So one thing that we notice is, for example, if we focus only on the blue one, right, and we look at the top left, we see that US, yes, okay, is able to kind of redirect more trade to itself. But if you still look at the blue one and you go one step down and you see Canada, how much Canada buy from US, even in the case of US tariffs alone, Canada will start buy less of US. There is a bit of trade-off here, which is explained by 2 reasons that we still need to investigate further. The thing is, when US put tariffs, it imports inflation. When it imports inflation, the terms of trade kind of deteriorate because the price of US goods becomes, the goods of US becomes more expensive, and that makes Canadian away from American markets. That, and possibly a bit of supply constraint from US, because now there is more internal demand to be served, okay? One other thing that you should notice is that there is a fundamental asymmetry between these 2 countries. If you look even the baseline in the first period, only 1% of American purchase, and here you need to go first row, second column, only 1% of American purchase expenditures in nominal terms come from Canada, whereas 10% of Canadian expenditures comes from American goods. That means that putting tariffs, that US putting tariffs to Canada is a lot less expensive than Canada putting tariff to US. So this is a very important asymmetry between these 2 countries in a conflict like that. We also look at some of a couple of main macroeconomic aggregates, GDP and inflation. Here, the interesting thing is, okay, tariffs are a little bit, for US, there will be a little bit of a recession, but that we know. But and a little bit inflationary, fine. What the interesting part, I think, is that on Canada, retaliation is very, very costly. For example, if you look in terms of the inflation, so second row, second column. You see that the rise in inflation in Canada is very, very high, and this is exactly because they are putting 25% tariff over 10% of the stuff they buy, right? So the effect, even if the tariff is the same, the effect must be much larger. But you also see that this inflation is sort of temporary, and on impact is very strong, but it also goes down quite steeply. And this is because you also import a recession. And with recession comes deflation. And in fact, we can sort of disaggregate this inflation by channels. So if you remember, I showed you how many channels we have in these models. We have expectation channels, we have cost pull channels, and we have demand pull channels. So the blue part is the cost push. The moment you put tariffs, you're going to have a cost push shock because you're increasing not only the price of final consumption good, but also intermediate consumption good. And that gets translated into the prices that your own firms are going to charge. And that's the main mechanism in the beginning. But as the shocks the shock does not disappear because it's permanent, but as time goes, this is a recessionary effect. The demand pool starts pulling your economy down because you're in a recession, and expectation of inflation turn to be positive to be negative even. And so you go into a deflation scenario. What we can do also, we can look at the dispersion of price across sectors and within sectors. If you remember, I showed you something like this during one of my lectures. How do you look at this graph? How do you read this graph? So on the x-axis, you have inflations, percentage change in production price process index. On the y-axis, you have sectors, and then the dot is the average inflation of that particular sector, and around it, you have the dispersion. Also, one thing that you should notice, and I think this is the interesting one, sectors are not ranked randomly, but they're ranked from the one that have least inflation to the one that have more inflation. And this is T1. This is one period after the shock happens. So you see, there is quite a lot of dispersion, both within sector and across sector, and manufacturing is the one which is hit most. What happens when we go ahead in time? You see the red thing is moving up, and other sectors are moving down, meaning that as time goes, manufacturing is not, the dispersion tends to increase, but the manufacturing sector is not the one driving the process anymore. This is, maybe you could have thought of it without a model, but this is an important information to know because this tells you how the shocks propagate within the Canadian economy. So manufacturing sector imports a lot from US. When you put the retaliatory tariffs, the manufacturer has to translate a lot of these increasing prices into increasing prices in its own goods. But then every Canadian industry buy Canadian manufacturing. That's a bulk of the economy. That's the key of the economy. And then you see that the rest of the inflation is really driven by the other sector, and you see how this propagates. And this is important to know from the policy perspective, because if you really want to do the retaliatory tariff, maybe you need to think of sort of adjusting mechanism, which are really sort of targeted, depending on which you are in the timeline of events, which sector you want to target. And here you can see it, I think, quite clearly. That's a bit of what this type of model can produce, the type of information they can give you, the type of mechanisms that are in there. Once you have this clear in mind, then you can think of running a bit of a less simple application. And this is the Liberation Day scenario. As we call it internally, this is the Armageddon. So this time, instead of putting just tariff on your, maybe this was not clear, but what I showed you so far is the tariff US versus Canada, but it's the whole global models behind the scenes. So you also pick spillover effect. You can also see what happens to countries that are not directly involved, okay? Now, same setting, different exercise. So we simply implement the tariffs that were announced on April 22nd. Of course, there are many countries that are directly involved that we not directly model. And this is the rest of the world, but we model the rest of the world, so we can also model these tariffs. We calculate an effective tariff rate towards the rest of the world, which is simply a weighted average of the tariffs that are announced, right? Weighted by how important trade is with the US. Okay, so now here I'm showing you just a selected sample of country, not all the countries that we have. So when you look at the trade shares, you have the usual thing. You say, this is from the point of view of US. This is how much US buy from Australia, Austria, Canada, and so on and so forth. In the last corner, in the bottom right corner, you have US to US. So they managed to increase the purchase of American goods by about 2% in our model. But if you see the response here, so how much they buy less with respect to other country, this is a little bit heterogeneous and depend on the type of good they buy. All right? And you see, for example, something that you should be interested in, that US managed to reduce a lot trade from Mexico. And Mexico, thank you very much. And Mexico export to US for Mexico, they appear to be very important. You can tell me more about it. And these differences in how much exposure you have to the shock reflects in how much your macroeconomy suffer from it. The first thing that we see, this is inflation. This is CPI, PPI, and so on and so forth. They do more or less the same. So this type of shock is inflationary for US, but deflationary for everybody else. Because US imports inflation and a bit of recession, but the cost push shock tends to dominate, whereas all the others imports a recession. So you have a deflationary effect. That's the same for everybody. But countries that are hit most by the shock, they have a stronger deflationary effect. And this is what we see for Mexico. For Mexico, in our simulation, is the country that is more affected by these tariffs and is also the country that got the highest deflation and because of the highest recession. I think we can wrap up it here. We can wrap it up here. So I think I don't need to repeat myself. I think you got the gist. The point of this is a methodological endeavor, an application, and also a sort of investigation between the effect of trade partner depending on their exposure to the shock. One thing I want to know to say so. There are two types of exposure. For example, Mexico and Canada, they're both exposed, but in a different way. Canada buy a lot of US, so for them, retaliation is very bad. Mexico sell a lot to US, and for them, the tariffs are very bad. Okay? That's about it. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you, Luca. So, okay. Yeah.
Sweet, thanks. Yeah, this is awesome again. So I think in one of your slides you had your foreign exchange rate as not, it was fixed. Am I right? I guess what was the choice in that? And then how would a floating might change that?
Okay, that's it. Sure. Yeah.
It seems that the suggestion is that if you would be kind enough to take 2 or 3 questions before starting to answer. Is that okay?
Thank you, Luca, for the presentation. It was very interesting. My question is, if you would consider this model a short-run model, because I guess maybe in the long run, technical change would play some role. So I would like to hear more about that, how you do that in the model.
Luca, one question is that when you take your model, all the tariffs are imposed on final goods,
No.
but no?
All goods.
So you have all that in price increase.
So they're imposed on intermediate goods, capital goods,
Okay,
and goods.
and you add up the price effect on them.
Sorry?
You add all the prices. I mean, since Mexico's trade with the US, products go 8 times across the border. So you introduce all that. Okay.
So thank you very much. So exchange rate missing. Exchange rate missing is okay. First of all, I should have said that it's an important thing that is missing because, of course, adjustment in the exchange rate will change the result of the model. As you can see, in all the models we're seeing, there is only one that exchange rate, and it's a very theoretical model. It's a very theoretical model. As people working maybe in SFC with 2 countries, exchange rate are a pain in the neck. In an empirical model are extremely difficult to do. Whatever you do, it's going to be arbitrary. So the honest question is we didn't want to take these difficulties on board. Having said that, the model has a big limitation. I'm sorry about this answer, but that's life. About short run and long run, you nailed it. This is short run, and indeed we run it for 8 to 12 quarters. This model was never conceived as a long run simply because you not have technological innovation. I worked myself on an extension of the model that is more that is long run. That is to say that essentially the technical coefficient of the production function change and evolves. But it's still a long way to go. So at the moment, whatever application you're going to see of this model are going to be short run. Yeah, I'm happy to take other questions. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. Thank you very much.
We are going to have a 20 minutes break.
All right, welcome back. So for this final bit of our, summer school / final day, final workshop, we have, the presentation from Juan Carlos Moreno Bride and Lorenzo Nalin. And I think I can see his screen, and then I finally can see his face. Okay, so I don't know if you want to go ahead and test your mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good to see you.
All right, good to see you too. Yeah, okay. Can you set up your slide, please?
Sure.
No, it's here. It's here. Yeah. Okay.
Can you see them?
Yeah, can you put it in the full screen mode? So
Yeah. I think now.
better, thank you. Yeah, that's better. That's better. Thank you. All right. Okay. So
You did Professor Moreno Bride?
Okay. Okay. So Moreno is coming on the stage. All right. This microphone will be on. All right, there you go. So a little bit of introduction of Lorenzo. Lorenzo is an esteemed friend of ours. I mean, including, Moreno Bride, I mean. And he's a consultant at the FAO in Rome. And he has a PhD at this actually here at his alma mater, let's say. And though he's actually from Italy, actually from Verona. So he's been working with me, with Lorenzo, on topics related to structural change, structural economics, and also stock flow consistent models. And I'll leave the floor to you, to him, and then also to you.
Thank you, Julian. May I have the?
Yeah. Oh yes. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to congratulate Julia and Wendy for organizing this seminar. It's great, and my friend Juan Manuel, he's here. It's the first time that we have such a seminar in this field in Mexico at UNAM. And this is like the Lorenzo Nalin's festival, because he wrote the first paper and he also wrote this. We sent you in your, I don't know, website or whatever, the paper that Lorenzo and I wrote that is the basis of this presentation. It's just to give you the background, it's a study that UNCTAD commissioned us to evaluate the UNCTAD model for global policy assessment. UNCTAD, as the UN, and this is before Trump, obviously is under a lot of pressure on finance. And well, what's the point of having a model at UNCTAD, which the IMF has one, the World Bank has another one. So the new secretary of UNCTAD, Mrs. Greenspan, commissioned a team of 8 of us, Nelson Barbosa, I don't remember the other 6, to see what we thought of UNCTAD's policy model. But in the sense, not in the academic sense, which is, we have a lot of respect for academia, but for UNCTAD, the important point is how useful is the model? Why use that one, or why don't use another one, or just rely on the World Bank, etc. So we prepare that study. You have it in your website, where it's confidential. So please, if you want to quote it, you have to ask Lorenzo and me for the permission. UNCTAD is deciding whether they're going to publish it as a book or to do something about it. Wendy, well, Julia sent it to you. To make it, I don't know whether the screen disappeared. Yes, hello. Yes, there it is. The presentation is divided in those 5 points. Essentially, I mean, talking with you or presenting here, to be frank, you know what are the SFC modeling essentials and why it matters for policy makers at national global level. And so I'd like to concentrate more with Lorenzo. How many economists you need to? When do you do it?
Because we are seeing Lorenzo's.
Lorenzo, so thank you, Lorenzo.
Okay, we actually have this.
That's him presenting. Yes.
Yes.
Well.
Am I presenting, Professor, or you start and I...
It's like MTV, no? It's such a fast pace.
That's it.
That's it.
Are we able to control it?
Now I control it? No,
now you control it. Yeah.
Oh, I control it. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that you know, we had to convince UNCTAD what's the important thing of looking at flows on stocks. It sounds really easy for you, but what was the point of it? And before Luca was presenting his great paper on trade, and when we look at what's happening now with Trump, it's not only trade, it's what's happening in finance, what happened with uncertainty, what happens to financial markets, what happens to the environment. So everything at the same time. So we wrote and we told UNCTAD basically that the SFC models allow us to monitor changes that may become very, very critical. If you look at the crisis of 2008-09, it was a crisis on the stock part of the global economy, not on the flow part of the global economy. So why is it that policymakers need SFC? I used to be not a policymaker, but an advisor to policymakers. I worked many, many years for CEPAL, and I also worked for Wayne Godley and for Francis Cripps and for Alexis Urieta and the whole lot. And I was an advisor for Lorenzo Nalin, who was the first thesis on stock and flow modeling that was presented in this university. So as we work, this technique or this approach allows to the financial fragilities that may lead to derailments of stable trajectories. For example, the pre-2020 or 2008-09 tracer dependencies among sectors, actors internationally, etc. Integrate real financial and external accounts with a systematic view on asset accumulation, economic activity, and key prices. Evaluate distributional effect, all the things that you know. Sometimes it's said that not within this group, because you are very well aware that this is not true, but in other discussions we've had with people outside of this frame, we say, well, there's no theory behind the SFC, and we say, well, there's a lot of theory behind the SFC, and it's, you want to call it eclectic, but we take from different sources, like the accounting principles, institutionally, Keynesian, the portfolio approach, or Keynesian and post-Keynesian demand-led finance, balance of payments constrained, etc.
No, because
I think it lost them. Oh yeah, there it is. The long journey, the money flow social accounting up to the 2021 much more modern applications SFC. And what I'd like to basically bring you to this part, which is going to be much more interesting to you, because the whole story please read the paper. I think you'll find it very interesting. I hope so. It's written from an advisor to policymakers perspective. But this part, Lorenzo, I leave you the floor, because now you get to know, we want to introduce you to get to know the UN global policy model. Initially by Cripps and Isurieta. I was in Cambridge when Cripps and Godley published their book Macroeconomics. There was no single reference to any other economist. I mean, it was such an act of intellectual arrogance that I hadn't seen before, and I love those two guys. But anyway, Lorenzo querido, all yours.
Yeah, can I share my screen so I don't ask you to go to next slide, which is boring too. 1 second. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks to INET and UNAM. As was briefly mentioned, I spent quite a lot of time in Mexico. I spent almost 9 years there, and I graduated as a PhD scholar from UNAM. So it's even if it's just virtually, but being back, it's always great. So having said that, and without stealing too much time, what we want to do today with our presentation is not presenting very technical stuff, but more sending messages on what this stock flow modeling can bring to us as a technician that supports policymakers. Because I guess in the audience, most of you guys will be working either in the academia or as a technician in public institution or international institution, but all of you will be supporting somehow policy decision making. So that's important to us, transmit you why this stock flow modeling is important as a tool for policy development, and in particular for global policy development. And there are two, for us, recent important examples of how this stock flow modeling has becoming a reference in the literature and in apply policy analysis for global perspective and for site exercise worldwide. One is the model we're going to see, which is the global policy modeling from the UN, and the other one is the ERIM model. I'll start to briefly describe what this model does, the last one, because I think it's an important contribution that emerged. And then I will switch back to the GPM. But the main message here is that SFC are international institutions that do public policy and support governments in doing public policy, are becoming aware of stock flow modeling and are getting used to use them to their framework, which is something important. When we started 10 years ago, more or less, not me and Professor Breed or Giuliano, when we started using them, the modeling of stock flow, it's, as we saw before, much older than us. But when we were modeling, it was more a theoretical exercise within a fight between heterodox and orthodox economics. Now is a reality, is a model that can respond to different research questions and policy research questions, and has been applied by several institutions. Some of them are the IMF, the World Bank, which have commissioned to the expert review of debt, nature, and climate a committee, a stock flow modeling to evaluate how debt and climate change and financial instruments are connected among them. And so this is a first, the report which I suggest you to read if you're interested in this kind of apply global SFC modeling was presented at the IMF Global Bank spring reunion that took place in April. So it's recent. It's a recent publication, and it's, I think, the most recent application of SFC modeling as a tool for development. The other model has a little bit longer tradition, is the GPM from the UN, and I'll be presenting it in a few slides. But what are the main advantages of modeling the entire world, the global economy, using these models? Well, first of all, I guess you've been talking about this, the potential of the model to incorporate not just real flows, not just trade, but also see how the financial sphere influence them, and especially asset prices, and how these changes in prices in stocks feedbacks into the real sector, and how between different regions these continuous swings that modern economies face affect each other, and how eventually some bubbles, creditor-debtors links, some shocks in one part of the world create a systemic risk that comes out as a cross-border contagion phenomena in another part of the world. This is important because if you look at DSG, CG, and other type of modeling, nothing against them, but they don't have this full capacity of linking the role of stocks, the role of their influence on flows, and how this continuous recalibration between equilibriums of flows and stocks eventually influence the economy. Another important aspect of this SFC modeling is how actors, sectors among countries interact. So let's go back in time and think about the Mexican crisis and who was financing the banking sector in Mexico. It was not within the economies, it was another sector from foreign economies, the US mainly. So by understanding how a sector in one country is accumulating debt, but while the debtor is from another country, is a proper way to have a warning signal system that can give you a long-term perspective of how a relationship between global economies are projected to be. So concerning the UN the UN GPM, so why we think this is a useful model and why we advise the UN to keep this model. First of all, it's at least in my opinion, but I agree with my co-authors. It's a first tentative of having an empirical, full stock global consistent model, which given the number of countries and the number of data and the amount of data you have to use, it's per se an exercise that deserves to be recognized in the literature and to be still promoted, because it's not something that you done easily. And this type of modeling goes beyond just consistencies in flows and stocks, but provide a global model that is a little bit different from what you will see from other international organizations, in the sense that all the countries or group of countries that are modeling within the GPM model are endogenous. So It's a little bit different process, for example, from a model from, let's say, IMF or World Bank for global projection. In that case, they have a global model that is fed by a country level model. So I'm working at the country office or the regional office. I have my model, I have my estimates, and then once I obtain my estimates, I will send them to the central office, and they will use them as an input in a global but a relative small scale model. In this case, all the countries are modeled, or regions are modeled at the same time using stock flow consistent data, which is an innovation, a really important innovation in the literature. But besides technicality, and again, this is not a presentation to give you technicalities after a week of technical inputs, is a presentation to provide you what really a stock flow modeling can do. And a good way to understand that is looking at the Trade and Development Report from UNCTAD, which used this global policy model to evaluate relevant issues for now and for the future within the report. So just to mention the last four, you can read them on the screen, and you can find how current these topics are: trade wars, Green New Deal, so investing in ecological transition, stimulus versus austerity, and also how regional responses, coordinated regional responses, especially the South-South policy coordination, could navigate this new global disorder, I would call it. And the model is, one of the characteristics of this model is this flexibility, in the sense that at most you can model 25 blocks, 16 individual countries from developed regions, the G20, plus 9 regional aggregation. And this is useful because according to the model you want to perform, according to your research question, you can have some groups of countries, you can have regional aggregates, you can model according to your question. And of course, it's a demand-led model, but includes portfolio balance and portfolio flows, which is easy sometimes to do if you have, as Giuliano showed for the case of Colombia, a good disaggregation of the capital account in national statistics. But if you think at having portfolio balance and flows for 119 countries, this is a huge work and a huge contribution to the literature. And of course, to do so, you have to give up something. And what the model gives up is the complexity of the economies, in the sense that, as you can see by the sectors used in the model, the disaggregation is limited by households, non-financial firms, banks, government, and rest of the world. But still, looking for portfolio data for all those actors is not an easy task, and this model has brought to the literature a power tool that it doesn't just track trade, but also has the ability to track financial flows. In addition, there are different models in the model, and UNCTAD uses them according, again, to the research question. So if you are interested in distribution effect of some policies, you can activate a distribution section in the model. The same for energy and environment. Of course, energy and environment are nowadays really important, so they're always used in recent application. The distribution module, given the complexity of estimating parameters, is used when needed. It's important that the models takes into account prices of commodity. This is important because UNCTAD his mandate is to promote development and trade, and it works mainly with low and middle income. And commodities are an important source of revenues, an important driver of their economy, as the commodity dependence is nowadays from 75 to 80%, depending on how you define developing countries. But still, having prices of commodity within a global model provides you a good tracker of how most of the world is going, given fluctuation in those prices. Foreign exchange here is empirically estimated, although with some simplicity assumption. Interest rate as well are endogenous. At least the reference rate is endogenous. It's important also to mention another novelty of the model, which is that is estimated using a global panel dataset. Generally, when you calibrate this amount of equation in SFC modeling, what you use is an algorithm that, given your theoretical structure of the model, given the historical data you want to simulate, finds the parameters for you. So it's nothing against it. It's a complicated and useful way to get parameters, but it doesn't give you the economic how do you say, it doesn't give you economic insight about those parameters. While if you estimate them using global panel data, is much more difficult, but also you have kind of a structural approach on how you're calibrating the model. And by structural approach, I mean that if you have a region where a specific variable is important, let's say debt, let's say GDP per capita, you can UNCTAD use it in the equation, of course, after a deep literature review. Doesn't throw in a panel set variable just for fun, but based on the structural and theoretical stylus facts of the region, you can tailor-made some estimation in order to have much more real parameters. Let's go like this. Again, not showing equation, just showing how the complexity of this model works. Basically, you have for each country or each group of countries interacting with the global markets, where global markets provide to regions or specific countries commodities, energy, manufacture, services, and credit, basically through global financial markets. These variables fit in the regional or country system, and in the country system, they are used, of course, for production, for their use as input for investment, together with local production of inputs, of manufacturer product, of services. And this setting clearly create income, define employment, define the output, also define inflation and the reaction from the monetary and fiscal authorities. And important things that at each country level or group of country is measured is the natural resources, so the initial stock of resources the country or group of country has, the capital stock, and also one important element I would stress, which is not commonly used in stock flow modeling, is population. So given the rise of population, introducing in this type of modeling setting, the population variable is important. As our colleagues showed before, the way you use this model is basically to estimate a scenario where you do nothing, which is the business as usual scenario, and then you introduce policies. So in the exercise of the 2020 Trade Development Report, what was important for UNCTAD was to avoid, or at least let the public know about the risk of another lost decade. So why is that? Before the COVID-19 crisis hit the world economy was already in a slowdown phase, especially some emerging regions, due to the fall of the decreasing commodity prices. So, for example, Latin America, even before the COVID, was already in recession or close to a zero growth rate. So the point here is that if you're already slowing down, plus the COVID hit you, and you don't do anything, what does your future look like? It looks like as growing just 2%, the GDP of the world, but also this growth doesn't close the gap in inequality, doesn't provide decent employment. On the contrary, the baseline scenario suggested that there was a rise in unemployment. So surfing a little bit on this new wave of the role of the state that thankfully I would say we have been hearing since the COVID, the idea was to see what a public investment surge could have done, especially in green sectors, could have done to the global economy. So this experiment was basically relying on two points. First one, fiscal stimulus, equivalent in the exercise at an investment rate of increasing the investment of the public sector to reach 2% of GDP, the word GDP annually for a sixth straight year, and that this type of fiscal stimulus should be directed to social spending and infrastructure, in particular healthcare and green infrastructure. While for the social part, this concern more progressive wage and social protection policies to avoid the constant fall we observe in the labor share of GDP. While also part of the stimulus was investing in renewables, 7.5% per year. And another important point was not just investment in renewables, but also improving the energy efficiencies that are detected in non-renewable sectors. That means if I have to use a non-renewable source of energy, at least use it in the best way. And then another important thing that this experiment was about is global rebalances. So we've been hearing, for those who just follow the news, how now the world is divided in a fight between those who have current account surpluses and those who are in a current account deficit. So this exercise, I try to look at what if the countries that experience current account surpluses try to help those who are in deficit. And I spent a little bit of time presenting these scenarios because, again, I want to emphasize how global modeling through stock flow, consistent structure models can depict a series of current complex challenges that maybe cannot fully describe through other type of modeling. So I present some of the results. First of all, it's not my model, so you can criticize as much as you want, and the results are not my responsibility, but no, aside from joking, I present some of these results which are interesting, which are the type of support that you have from global models to narrative and shift in the narrative in global policies. And I report the most interesting one, and I report here an important concept when you do global policies and when you try to model global policies. There are always trade-offs. So my first advice as an almost old person is to not believe in those models that provides you a wonderful world where no trade-off occurs. Especially if you are trying to help policymakers in decision, you have to show what the trade-offs are, because trade-offs are all around us. And one of the trade-offs from these green growth revival scenarios is inflation, because if you bust the economy through public spending and you overheat economies, for sure you have an increase in aggregate demand, but also in prices. And here is shown by the rise in international oil prices. But this price increase is temporary, and then over the medium term, 2030, it will adjust. But through that adjustment in prices, there is also a positive consequence for several environmental indicators, such as the production of fossil fuels, which clearly, if you invest more in renewables, you can decrease the production and the reliance of the countries on fossil fuels, and also increases, of course, the other part of the story is that you increase energy production by non-carbon sources, and hopefully you will overall decrease the emission of the global economy. As you remember from 2 slides ago, one important point of this exercise is to send the message and promote coordination between countries. Because if you want to reach certain goals at the global level, you can not reach them without having countries align and cooperated among them. And one important thing is the current account. The current account basically says if you are a net creditor, a net debtor, if you have enough technology to avoid the imports of certain capital goods, if you are dependent on energy, if you are dependent on food supply from other regions. So being in a current account position or in a deficit account position completely changes the development path of a country. And the fact that you are in a current account surplus or deficit, it's not because you're better or worse than someone else. Most of the literature, I don't have to explain you have Professor Moreno Breed there, but most of this divergence in development path is because of structural reason. So if you don't have, if patents in the world are protected by certain rights and you cannot adopt or produce by yourself certain technologies, of course you have to import them. Of course you have to import them in dollars, and of course you will likely experience current account deficits, and this put you in a vulnerable position, because to buy certain products you probably will have to issue debt, positioning yourself in a fragile or delicate way, especially when exogenous shocks occurs. So rebalances, the relationship between those who have current or deficit account is important. Also is important because sometimes these deficits are created by barriers. So I can export, I can have a trade surplus, which will help me issue less debt and be in a more sustainable position, but maybe I'm not able to access certain markets because of regulation, because of standard quality, so far and so on. So rebalancing these things is important at the global level. And when the exercise try to rebalance these things, and here let me open a parenthesis, is not rebalances by going to war with your trade partners and threatening everyone with tariff, but trying to have a coordinated strategy, which implies financial support, which implies technology transfer, market access, also start working with current account surplus countries in forcing them to have a strong demand rather than basically exploiting international trade. When you are able to cooperate on all these issues, well, the results are pretty I don't want to use the Trump word beautiful, are pretty interesting, let's say like this. So, for example, panel B, developed countries with surplus economy will have to trade off their surplus, but this will, of course, create a benefit for emerging markets, emerging countries which have current account deficits. And this goes on for different type of economies, and of course, so that's the part about rebalances. Then there is another positive spillover, another positive trade-off in this sense, that if you start by having expansionary policies, and I don't have to stress this issue too much, but if you have public expansionary policies, of course you will, in certain sectors, you will have a crowding effect. So the benefits are not just for rebalances, are not just for reducing emission, but also it's growth. So it's actually possible possible, given a certain type of coordination, to obtain a world where you reduce emission, where you rebalance trade and current account positions, and where also you grow more and create more decent jobs. I don't know if I have more time. I will continue with another example. How am I going with time?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps it would be better if you start to wrap it up. But
okay, no.
it's up to you.
Okay, no. So basically,
not that Julian is giving that advice, huh? Please.
No. So this wrapper.
Yeah.
I lost. Okay. So, the main messages from this exercise: public investment crowds in, international investment in technology transfer can help reduce inequalities. External imbalances and the reduction of them is a public good. And of course, current account surpluses should be addressed in order to put the global economy on a sustainable and robust growth path. This was just an example of how this SFC global modeling is applied. A more recent one is the TDR, the Trade Development Report from 2022. I won't go into deep in this one, but just to show how once you have a global, flexible, theoretical and empirical framework, you can easily adapt to address a question and to provide feedbacks for future challenges or for future initiatives. And one of these initiatives promoted, or at least put on the table, highlighted by UNCTAD, was to create a South-led way to address the current world, which is basically in disorder, which is realigning towards new geopolitical equilibrium. And of course, realigning geopolitical equilibrium means realigning also international trade, finance, and economy. So how this exercise was performed by having two scenarios. One is the most established in the playbook. It's called handoff scenario. It's a scenario where you basically continue with the current policies. So market have a preference way. You don't have to interfere with them. If you have inflation, just constrain your economy by raising interest rate. Supply bottlenecks are there because there is not enough free trade. And if you want to intervene, you can also give tax exemptions to global enterprises, and so on. I'm not going to read all of them. You are well aware of them. So what is the proposal from UNCTAD? Is to have a coalition of emerging lower middle income countries that could actually address some of the asymmetries and bias of this international trade and finance architecture that for many years have promoted profits for big corporations, but not addressed properly the needs for developing countries. And among the different suggestion to achieve this South-led way, the one that I think is really interesting is to promote cooperation, industrial diversification, finance exchange rate management among economies in the South. And this is basically achieved by 4 features: coordinated industrialization, cooperation in finance and technology, agrarian transition, which is important, and especially now that I'm working at FIO, I see how countries that focus too much on industrializing without being self-sufficiency in food production, at the end of the day becomes dependent from abroad due to the lack of a proper agrarian transition. And also to one of the distinctive feature of this new approach was to have a climate mitigation and adaptation strategy that was common among all the countries in the South coalition. And again, here are performance results. I'm not going too much in depth of these results. The report is there, but the main message is if we cooperate, if some regions can take a trade-off in growth. Some other regions will benefit from this realignment, this readjustment. For instance, regions such as Latin America that have been growing at disappointing rate could benefit from a much higher growth rate over the next decade. Africa as well. And talking about Africa, which is one of the countries that is most dependent on cross countries interdependencies, which means has the worst current account deficit around the world, could even get close to zero in those imbalances in the current account, and the same for Latin America. And while Europe, on the other hand, which has been benefiting from positive surpluses in the current account, will eventually give up some of them for this global new pathway, but still being a positive exporter of both credit and goods. And again, here are other simulation for the wage share, but just to conclude and to not steal too much time for the discussion, I think stock flow modeling have been throughout a long journey, as Professor Moreno-Braid was mentioning, and now we are at that point where not only a small circle or elite circle of heterodox economists are using them, but they are becoming a reality and they are becoming a tool for policies analysis. So I invite you all to check this example of how they are applied for this analysis, and maybe to take into account some of these aspects for your future research, because I think compared to many other models have some advantages, no doubt about that, to address current issues such as debt, climate change, inequalities, and so on. So I will stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Moreno-Braid. Thank you, Lorenzo. So let's open up the Q&A session. Okay, there we go. We have one.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I have 8 questions, but I can be very brief.
Take your time.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm very excited to read this book or report. I am curious to know when it will come out. Yeah, I'm very interested in these current account imbalances and financial fragility and debt, personally. So please let us know when it will come out. And then I'm curious, when you, Lorenzo, mentioned the expert review on debt, nature, and climate that was published in the spring meetings of the IMF and World Bank group, is this the ODI report? Because I was trying to find this report online and I couldn't find one from the IMF and the World Bank. But I can see an ODI report that was published around the same time of the spring meeting. That's my first question. Then, when you compare the UN global policy model with the IMF way of accounting for financial fragility, do you mean I am curious, when you did this comparison, what was it regarding financial fragility? And then when you talk about the IMF country-specific report compared to the GPM fully integrated country comparison, world comparison, do you mean the Article 4 consultations of the IMF when you do this comparison? As my next question. I'm curious to hear more, if you can, to expand on the global rebalances model. And when you talk about the green growth scenarios, the projections that you have, are they country specific or are they global? And when you talk about current account or like rebalances, are you envisioning it as the first drafts of Keynes' clearing union before he changed his idea, like where just some amount of current account surplus or deficit is allowed? Or I would love to hear more about the specifics of what you mean by rebalances. And lastly, when you talk about this UN coalition for global South countries, how recent that is? I have heard that from like Fadel Kaboub and Andres Chiriboga. And I think Andres Chiriboga now is doing his like post doc here in UNAM. And they have been talking about this, and now Fadel Kaboub is an UNCTAD, UNDESA. Yeah, I would like to hear more about this as well. Thanks so much.
Who starts?
Oh, yeah.
Professor?
Oh, yeah.
You start, Lawrence.
So
let me just add one thing. Ms. Huerta, some of the questions that you ask are explained in detail in the report that I sent you that says confidential, the comparison of the IMF model and UNCTAD's model and the World Bank's model. So perhaps if you just read that, and then we can, and that's one. The other one, when this report will be published, we really don't know, because it's 8 studies or 8 reviews, and we don't know whether UNCTAD is going to publish them or just take action on them. I mean, on our recommendation. I think that the 8 reports were very much in favor of continuing this effort and how to strengthen not only UNCTAD's view on this, but the idea of or the use of stock flow consistent models. And one of the recommendations that we made was that we have to create more friends among the people that are usually not our friends, which is central banks. So at CEPAL ages ago, I don't remember whether Lorenzo was with me or not, but we designed a series of workshops with money from, I don't remember where, but workshops for central bank staff in order to improve their modeling techniques so they wouldn't see, say, stock flow modeling, well, this is just heterodox and who knows what. So there's need to be much more work done on that. And yes, your turn, my dear Lorenzo. And there's another paper that Lorenzo and I are publishing with Mark Setterfield on the new handbook on heterodox macroeconomics, on debt and growth, so that we can also distribute via Julia or via Giuliano, if you're interested in trade and growth too. So anyway, your turn, my dear.
So about the modeling, Professor mentioned that those modeling from the IMF and the World Bank that we analyzed are in the report that we don't know when it's out. But if you look at the annex of the most recent reports from the IMF outlook, from World Bank outlook, from their basically their projection, you will find the models. Anyway, those are CG modeling, CG or DSG, or are some global models that are concerned with trade and climate change, but doesn't take into account finance. So if you look at them, they're not always providing a comprehensive picture of the global economy, of the phenomena that are happening. And I'm not saying this again to say we are better and we models in a proper way and they are wrong, because models at the end have to answer a research question, and that research question will define which equation you put in the model. But to answer modern research questions, in my opinion, then you have to start looking at the stock flow perspective. If you then models the behavioral equation from a post-Keynesian economics, from neoclassical economics, I actually, honestly, don't care that much, because economic theory is a part, but the message here is that if you don't look at both, assets, a stock of assets, and flow of assets, and flow stocks, and debts, and it's difficult. You can understand how the world is actually heading. So having said that, the green growth scenario was another question, is not country specific. These are region specific. So because the trade development report is a global report, so they are basically concerned about how regions will perform, how a shock in one region will be transmitted to another one. So all the projections are not done at the country specific level. And then there was a question about current account specific. What do I mean? So given that a deficit in the current account is not bad and per se, neither is a trade. Neither is a surplus in the current account an ideal situation that should be always achieved. But the point here and the message that UNCTAD and most of scholars, I think, that are concerned with balance of payment constraint, is that how these deficit and surplus are created. It's not about the number. It's not 2%, 3%, 6%. It's not that. Of course, at some point when a crisis hit, it is also the number. But it's how these deficit or surpluses are created. And if you can move from one side to another one. And in UNCTAD opinion, also mine, also I think I can speak about for Professor Moreno-Brito as well, moving from being in a position where you are dependent on foreign technology, capitals, foreign assets, foreign inputs in general, to a position where you're actually providing those input capital and technology and blah, blah, blah to the others. It's not easy. And it's based on some constraint economies face that are not so easily addressed. At least you implement policy coordination. That was the reasoning behind current account specificities of the example. It's not how much, it's not if it's good or bad, it's how can I change the situation if we want to change. It's not so easy, especially now that most of the countries are growing, according to the latest fiscal monitor report from the IMF, are growing debt in a faster way respect a decade ago, and are at most of the country in the world have reached the point where they are at a historical level of debt in their balance sheet. And last note I took was about the UN Coalition for Global South. The exercise was done in 2022, so it was more to highlight and put on the table what is possible to be carried out at the peripheral level in order to address and in order to navigate the turbulences that were at the time, 2022, created by geopolitical events. At the time, there were still some supply bottlenecks, prices in foods were rising. So how, if I'm a peripheral countries and I have no geopolitical power, or at least not as much as other countries, how can I still be influences the environment around me? And the proposal was the Global South Coalition, but there was not any references. I don't want to be wrong, but from my from what I remember, there were not references for any specific initiative, if a G20 Brazil-led initiative, if whatever of the multiple initiatives that thankfully have emerged throughout the years. I don't know if I addressed all the question.
I would add only just a key question is, what's the use of such a model for UNCTAD or for international organizations? To what extent an organization that doesn't have a lot of power in influencing on, moving money and moving policy in the G7, what's the use of this model? And I think there's a lot of use also. Say, for example, in Sevilla, in about a month, there's going to be the conference on finance and development, or finance for development, whatever. And I think that UNCTAD and the UN has the responsibility of having an analytical tool that shows that key policy change, besides external shocks, I mean, key policy changes in industrialized countries can have can have a very severe impact, not only on the less developed countries, but also on them at the same time. So, because all the world is interconnected in that sense. So, my impression is that this, our conclusion, certainly one should bring this huge, very, very powerful analytical tool to the table to discuss with the IMF, to discuss with the World Bank, but whether this will, the world is much better having strong analytical tools in the hands of organizations like the UN and on regional, like ECLAC, whatever, organizations for Latin America or Africa, than just seeing them as an academic instruments for the discussion. And I think that there's a responsibility, at least in my case, and I think Lorenzo too, to try to apply the stuff that we learn to try to influence the world. And I think this is a great tool, and we have seen many, many examples in the Mexican case. I mean, whatever, the 1994-95 crisis, it was supposed not to happen because a trade deficit that was linked to surplus or fiscal surplus was supposed not to have any impact in the medium-long run, because the private sector, if it has a deficit, was to be rational, will adjust automatically and take all the externalities, etc., into account. And then we ended up with a very, very different version of the world. Or another anecdote with Chile with Pinochet, when he went to the IMF, to Washington, and he was, they say so, that he was rather at ease because he argued that the debt of Chile was private. And they told him, well, listen, let me tell you, it was private, now it's public. And it's very important to know about stocks and flows and the sectors that accumulate wealth or accumulate debt and how that's done. And if you only look at one, I mean, we've seen in this country, they say, oh, great, Mexico has a current account surplus or a trade surplus. That per se, as Lorenzo was saying, it's absolute rubbish, because you can have a trade surplus if your economy is not growing at all. And so there are many, many important issues that only when you look at stocks and flows, well, you know, the important national accounting of stocks and flows from sectoral perspective and international, then I think you do get to know that, to see the full picture. And without that, well, recommendations, at least maybe not only a pinch of salt, but huge tons of salt in them.
Thank you. I think we have one more question from the public.
Manuel is online also raising the hand.
Yeah, Manuel, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos and Lorenzo. It was very insightful. I'm also looking forward for the report. I was wondering if you had different scenarios on conditional debt alleviation for global South countries, and if that actually made a difference. In a sense, what I meant by that is such a kind of debt relief program for some global South countries, conditioned on that this is used as green investment. Maybe I missed that, but it would be nice to highlight that, because I think one of the very interesting features of your model is that you are able to do some macro coordination among different, if I understand well, among different countries. So that's an interesting feature. I would like to know more about that. And if you can tell us a little bit more about your results in terms of what would be the best international coordination program for avoiding an unequal green energy transition. That will be interesting to know one of your results on that sake. Thank you very much again.
Just one minor. It's great seeing you, Manuel. It's not our model. So when you talk about our model, well, it's not our model, as Lorenzo was accurately saying. And what UNCTAD does is that every every time that they prepare this trade and development report that is presented to the whole set of nations and including international organizations that are present there with, say, World Bank, etc. So they focus on different aspects. So the ones that Lorenzo was presenting was the one on 2020, and he just mentioned 2022, but I invite you to see the different issues of this trade and development report and to consult UNCTAD website. There are scenarios for the debt accumulation process of you said developing countries or highly indebted countries. Yes, there are that. And the other question was on what's our view on green transitions or something like that. No, I didn't get it. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, more like what are the interesting results to avoid the unequal green transition that you actually mentioned on the report, on the document that you sent. There's quite differentiated path towards an energy transition framework. If you have something like that, if you have some policy, international coordination insights on that.
Lorenzo, your turn.
Yes, so with respect to the previous question, as Professor Moreno said, it's not our model, but still, there are important insights from that model, UNCTAD model, is that the creditor countries, so those who have current account surpluses, provide grants to those who are in need of financing. So instead of issuing debt, which could be procyclically reevaluated in international market, is basically a fund created by creditor countries to debtor country. That was the coordination mentioned by UNCTAD for that scenario. And actually debt was rising at the beginning, and then I didn't report those slides because there are a bunch of graphs, but specifically for debt, the trajectory would be initially growing and then over time decreasing. So the question you ask about the policy coordination and green transition. So I'm a little bit biased by finance, so because I'm coming from that world and probably my knowledge goes better there. So you provide the answer to your question. So financing is for me the most important thing you have to focus right now for climate change, because we have solution. We're solution not to all the problems, but we have technology that could be adopted by countries that are polluting more. And if you look at greenhouse emissions, most of greenhouse emission now is not from developed economies. Actually, it's a quarter from developed economies. And then, of course, there are other economies emerging. And look at the example of China. It's the first polluter in the world that are generating more emissions. So the point is, if you want, and we want, to have lower middle income countries to grow and to grow in a sustainable way, we have to provide them some resources to invest in the green technology, which is available in developed countries, but is not available in developing countries. Because we are living the paradox where some cities have all of people have electric cars, and then the car makers sell the old cars to the developing world, which the paradox we live in. And then we look at emissions, and emissions are always growing. So the point is how all of us, hopefully, if we assume that electric cars is the fix of the problem, I'm just making an example. But if you assume that all of us would be better off, climatically speaking, by driving an electric car, then we have to provide credit to those countries that don't have an industry for electric car, don't have the income for electric cars to buy one. And by doing so, you cannot rely on the typical financing scheme of issuing debt, and this debt is linked in a procyclical way to your economy, so you can issue more debt until the point the economy grows, until the economy suffers a shock, or the global economy suffers a shock, and there is no more credit, and you're tightening, interest rates are increasing, so all the resources you got for the green transition instead of providing a long-term sustainable growth and investment in proper sectors came back as a boomerang, and now you have a lot of debt. You have to pay more on that debt, and you didn't finish with this long-term project of industrializing in a green way. So I wouldn't say that is the panacea for all the problems, but financing is a relevant solution. And if you look at the conferences that UN organizes every year they sign wonderful statements saying we're going to put bazillion of USD, and everyone is on the same page, and then no one pays. And then the next conference will be again, we're going to put another 60 billions for emerging countries, and it's always the same story, but it doesn't seem to materialize that solution, that policy. So I think getting away from the normal financial way of financing this type of project is a fundamental step.
I would add to Lorenzo say the Trade and Development Report of 2023, Manuel. The title was Growth, Debt and Climate, Realigning the Global Financial Structure. And that's a key point of the Sevilla conference this month. The 2024 report is even more, eye-opening. Rethinking development in the age of discontent, the macroeconomics of discontent, the illusion of a rebound, globalization at the inflection point, the global south of the new international tax architecture, not only financial, but tax architecture. I invite you, young scholars and the ones interested in policy, to read these reports, and some of the questions that you're posing, you'll find it.
In the chat, I also put the one that I was asked for before, and I mentioned the ERI model. It's in the chat of this Zoom call. And again, it's nature, climate, and debt. So it's not me saying financing is fundamental. It's most of the economists. So I don't want to take credit for someone else, but it looks an important thing.
Thank you, Lorenzo. So we have one more question, and then I think we have to wrap it up. So Santi, please.
Thank you. I mean, one was partly already answered by Juan Carlos. It was more about the experience of working in international organization as a heterodox economist, and how to get in and how it's working inside that. That was already answered. Another was more specific on the presentation. There was a part where you showed that population is inserted in the model. I'm working on that, so I was curious. Particularly, I think there was a feedback effect from the economy to the labor force. Is that just participation rate, or how is that model?
Population, if I don't make a mistake, influences the labor share and influences the general level of prices and GDP growth. And it's taking exogenous, of course.
Okay.
Maybe I'm forgetting another transmission channel, but yes, it's there and it influences different channels.
An additional question on that would be migration, Santiago. So, because you can take population exogenous, but now with all the things that are happening with migration, and I don't know how it's taken into account, maybe Lorenzo knows.
There is a specific report on migration from UNCTAD using the model. If you ask me which one or tell you the story, I actually don't remember it. But there is, I recently read all the titles, the recent titles, and one is about migration. Because again, migration is linked with climate change. So.
And with Trump?
I think Manuel raised an issue in the chat regarding.
Oh, no, it's just asking for the
slides.
slides.
The slides, yeah, for sure.
All right. So yeah, thank you again to Professor Pri, to Lorenzo, and so we come to an end, and then we are again with the company of Julia. So, and also Manuel, who was obviously one of the organizers, and so So yeah,
Thank
I
you.
mean, short word of for wrapping up the entire event. So up to you.
Well, thank you very much again for the 11th time. It doesn't matter. It's never enough to thank all of you. I'm very proud of your work. I'm proud of Young Scholar also and my university because they have been a very warm organization, but not because of me, but because all of the people who are in the building and the other students, I think so, and the basket tacos. And engineers and my mother. Yeah. My father is over there. But my point is, I'm very proud because I say this is the third time, but I'm going to say again, this is the first time that something like this is happening here in my postgraduate building, at least. These kind of topics and this level of all of you, for those who are online and who are here personally, we decide at the beginning because of Manuel to have not that a huge, a massive amount of person, but the correct person, so a quality, a very high quality, I think so. As a human being, but also as professionals and students. So thank you very much for all of this, and for sure, Young Scholar, but Manuel, who has been my partner in crime in not only summer school but also some other initiatives that are happening here at UNAM, and my other colleagues in the organizing team. I want to give the microphone to Manuel. I think he has something to say also.
Yeah, no, well, also very thankful here. Unfortunately, I couldn't join this time. I was in Mexico 2 weeks ago, so it was quite tough for me to come back again for the time zone. But I am super happy about this experience, and thank you very much, UNAM, for being the place of pluralistic debate and also providing this space that is sacred. So also thank you very much, Julia. You did it. Without you, wouldn't be possible, and without the team that is there. It was an amazing work since the beginning that you came with the idea the last year, where we also worked together. I think also we have had very good results in terms of community building. I also want to thank Angela, Juan Carlos, Lorenzo. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juliano, Luca, I just feel admiration for your work, and also thank you very much for the patience to teach us very valuable things that will help us a lot right now in our young research path. And finally, thank you very much to all the young scholars that attended, that took the time, that traveled hours and hours to be there. Thank you very much for your questions and very much for your enthusiasm. Young Scholars Initiative it's an organization that promotes the heterodox thinking in economics. I think that we are maybe perhaps in average in a small number, but that allows us to actually work closer to make more things together. I hope from this event some others can come out. It doesn't have to be in presence, it can be everywhere in the world or online. So again, thank you very much for everyone who made this possible. And see you in the next year's edition. Thank you.
Well, last but not least, I also want to thank Angela. It was a very, very nice discovery for me to hear you about all these new topics. Also, Professor Lorenzo Nalin, of course, and Professor Juan Carlos Moreno Reed, who I already say I know, but he's one of the top of the top of the top of this building and this country. And as a human being, but also as my professor and mentor. And of course, both of you guys who have been here for 8 hours per day or something, it feels like something like that. Luca Fierro, who now I think this is the best part of the young scholar, I think, and in this initiative that you discover that all of them are human beings also. They are also very kind, because sometimes you think like they're like unachievable and they are like something like that, you know what I mean? And now I think I want to think that you are very good friends now, because I'm going to go to Austria. I want to give you the word to both of you if you want to say something, because it's recording this.
So I already said a few words yesterday at the end of the summer school, but I'm very grateful for this opportunity and honored to have met you and talked with you all. And I also have new friends, so I plan to come to Mexico next year, so be ready to host me. And so yeah, that's that. It was an enriching experience. I hope you learned something, because I learned a lot, as I told you yesterday, and good luck with everything, life, work, and everything that matters.
Well, Professor Angela, please.
Just a few words to say. It's been a very enriching week. It's been very nice to meet you, all of you, and learn from Luca and Giuliano, and understand that we are on the process to connect this microeconomic thinking for development, inclusive development, with all these global approaches. And now, listening to the previous presentations of Juan Carlos and Lorenzo, I was really happy. It's one way to think in alternative ways of a global order. And if we don't imagine alternative ways to build a more sustainable economy, as I said in my conference, the path towards sustainable development and make it a true path, well, a path that we're really walking through it. And as a region in Latin America, there are so many people that are excluded from this development or even this global order. So it's time to question it and imagine alternatives. And this view of coordination in the global south, it's a really fundamental piece that we need to work out. So thank you so much. And I hope to meet you again in the future on another summer school version.
I mean, I will just say the following. It's all about networking, guys. So keep networking, and yeah, I'll surely meet you again in some of the, whatever, a random event in the near future, either a modeling conference or a more sort of policy-oriented one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just following on what Julia just said, that when you think that people are inaccessible, Luca, they just won the Scudetto in Italy, and he's a very normal guy. So, I mean, it's possible to be very, very successful and very nice.
I was very different on the night of the Scudetto.
Well, finally, we're like reaching the end, but of this edition. I want to see you guys to the maybe next year, maybe on live if you don't like tacos anymore or something. But also, this initiative, I hope so. It's going to take every year, but also we're, as I said to some of you, we're planning to have a new edition, 2.1 edition or something like that in Italy. No, thank you. In Italy, so I hope to see your request when the call for participants take place, maybe around 1 month or something. We are gonna be again, I think so, all together. Professor Luis Cárdenas del Rey also, it's gonna be there. He's here. Actually, he's very kind. He's having a state research here. So thank you very much also you, Professor Luis. So anyway, thank you, all of you. I'm proud of you. Yeah, and we are gonna take a photograph, a final one, because here the screen it's like bigger than the other one at the classroom, I think. So if all of the participant wants to be come here up with us to the stage, yeah, come.
This is like a rock festival. Todos.
Sí.
Is on stage or on stage?
I have to say, and I need to be this recorded. I want to thank especially to Wendy. An applause to Wendy. Yeah. But here, I mean, they're gonna take a picture with here. Yeah.
Okay. No, you stay in the center.
Yeah, I don't want to be in the center.
Oh, no.
Sí se ve bien de ahí.
O sea, pega donde sea. Ahí va.
Se ve.
Pega un poco más,
Está así.
Hay espacio. Y vengas. Acá. Ya.
Yo no quiero.
Sí, es esta, güey.
Inmediatas,
Ayuda.
De lado.
De lado. Daggy. Aranceles. Zurdos.
¿Sí se ven las personitas online? Súper.
Pero si no es online.
Ahí déjenme.
Es un selfie que está tomando.
Well, thank you guys. We're going to upload the whole sessions, and we're gonna see not one of the, no, yeah. We're okay, yeah, we're okay. I'm going to, I don't know, maybe send you all the sessions by email or something. We're gonna see how, but you're gonna get the material and the presentation and everything. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.